I'm Josh Hammer, and this is The Josh Hammer Show. So, the war of words and the war of actions, this Mexican standoff, if you will, between Donald Trump and the federal government, more generally speaking, as well as Tim Walz and the insurrectionist, anarchist, Democrat bastions across the country, that continues to be the story that is shaping the national conversation. So there have been mixed reports over the extent to which the Trump administration is backing down since the video that went viral, this latest video, this shooting of Alex Preddy, the nurse, as has been widely reported, the nurse at the VA hospital in Minnesota, who brought his armed weapon to this protest, although it wasn't really much of a protest. It was actually the obstruction of an active law enforcement operation. Just to reiterate my stance on that before we go any further. Look, you're not going to find any stauncher supporter of the Second Amendment than me. I conceal carry every single day of my life. But there is a big difference between taking your carry weapon to the local supermarket or restaurant, or in my case, when I go to pray at synagogue or you go to church, a big difference between that and taking it to, again, not standing on the sidewalk where you can hold your dumb Soros-funded sign and say your First Amendment protected speech. No, that's not what Alex Preddy was doing. Alex Preddy went there for the purpose of obstructing an active law enforcement operation. Okay, so let's just stipulate that. There's been a lot of conversation about how do we balance the Second Amendment concern? How do we balance the First Amendment free speech concern? How do we balance just the more general rule of law concern here? And to me, it's actually fairly simple. You can take your firearm, perhaps you should, to a peaceful protest if you were actually peacefully protesting. If you're going to get in the middle and get in the faces of law enforcement officers, whether they're local cops or federal agents, maybe, just maybe, have a modicum of common sense and leave that piece, that firearm piece, in the car, at home, or whatever. So that's my quick word on that. Nonetheless, as we've conceded here on the show, the video is not great. The video of Alex Preddy it's not entirely clear exactly what happened, but it doesn't look great. We've been very, very reluctant to jump to conclusions here. I am firmly of the opinion that we learn more information over the course of days, perhaps even weeks. For instance, after the Renee Good shooting a few weeks ago in Minneapolis, we didn't know right away that Jonathan Ross, the agent who was rammed by Renee Good, we didn't actually know that he had internal bleeding and a severely damaged hip and had to go to the hospital, from which he was subsequently discharged. So you learn a lot in the hours, days, sometimes weeks in the aftermath of these sorts of things there, which is one of the many reasons that we don't jump to conclusions and start to pin the blame immediately on the agents there. But nonetheless, there's not just the substance, there also is the politics of this. And the politics of this have been somewhat murky. Now, admittedly, there is definitely an information operation going from the media to all the way to Democrat officials there that are pushing this unified line that Trump's immigration agenda is wildly unpopular. And they say these horrific things. We'll get to that in a few minutes here. They make these constant absurd comparisons to outrageous, offensive comparisons to the Nazi regime and all of that there. It's outrageous stuff. On the one hand, there was a reputable poll from the New York Times Siena College, one of the top pollsters in the country, showing that Donald Trump's immigration agenda polls favorably by a narrow 50 to 47 margin. On the other hand, our pal Harry Enton, the chief data analytics polling guru over on air at CNN, had a poll that he was analyzing the other evening showing that the specific approval of Donald Trump's ICE enforcement, so ICE only, is 28 points underwater. So your mileage may vary when it comes to the politics of it. But the key thing to me is that there are some things that you kind of just have to do because you kind of just have to do it. Okay? Not everything in politics can or should be about licking your finger and seeing which way the wind is blowing. Immigration law is a solemn part of this nation's laws. Immigration is the one issue that affects everything. It affects the economy. It affects the labor market, supply and demand for wages, for labor. It affects crime. It affects national security. It affects the most foundational questions in politics of all, being, who are we the people? Going back to the most basic rudimentary questions as to what is a people, what is a nation state. So you got to know who's in the country, and you got to know who is not in the country. Now, this back and forth over the past few days, Tom Homan, who I just love. I mean, I can't get enough of Tom Homan. Tom Homan has been sent into Minneapolis there. He had this meeting with Governor Tim Walz yesterday. Tom Homan saying that this meeting with Tim Walz apparently went well. I guess they are at least on the same page when it comes to criminal aliens. Tom Homan saying that there's some missing information here when it comes to whether they're on the same page when it comes to just all illegal aliens. That's our stance here on the Josh Hammer Show, by the way. We are of the opinion that if you cross this border illegally, you have already committed a sufficient crime to justify deportation. That would have been a policy that would have been unanimously supported all across the American political spectrum as recently as the Bill Clinton era. In fact, Bill Clinton essentially saying as much during his 1995 State of the Union address. This notion that if you are here illegally, that is enough sufficient evidence to get you the heck out of here. But anyway, in any event, Tom Homan saying that he and Tim Walz don't agree on that. Donald Trump also saying that he had this wonderful phone call with Tim Walz a couple days ago. And my 2 cents to Homan and Trump and the whole administration is essentially this, which is I wouldn't believe these guys for a second. I mean, why would you believe Tim Walz? Why would you believe this administration that they're assisting you or that they share your concern? And this notion that Minnesota and Jacob Fry, the mayor of Minneapolis, that the local localities, the cities, this notion that they are assisting the feds when it comes to immigration here is nuts. It's absolutely nuts. So the situation in Minnesota is essentially as follows. When an illegal alien is convicted of a crime and he's set to be released from prison, it's true that the state or local authorities in Minnesota, if I understand it correctly, are indeed notifying ICE. They're basically saying, hey, we're going to let this guy go. Guess what they're not doing? They're not honoring the detainer requests. So if ICE sends a request to detain an illegal alien until they get there to pick him up from a state or local penitentiary, they're not doing that. So what is this notion that Tim Walz and Jacob Fry and the Democrat leadership in Minnesota, what is this notion that they actually are assisting the feds? I'm not buying that for a second. I'm not sure exactly why there is this notion that we're going to believe these people when they say they're assisting there, when it seems to me that they very clearly are not. So that's the very first thing to say. But the most important thing is this, which is, Mr. President, you have to see this mission through. There are any number of reasons why this mission must be seen through. On the one hand, there's this notion that we've been explaining for weeks now, that these so-called sanctuary jurisdictions are simply the rise of a new Confederate sentiment. This notion that you can so-called nullify federal law and just deem this a no federal law apply zone. Take your dumb city, take your dumb town, your dumb state, and say that you feds, your law does not apply here. That is a recipe for anarchy. That is a recipe for secessionism. It's there in the Constitution, Article 6. It says federal law is supreme. We fought a bloody civil war. 600,000 plus men gave their lives to establish the proposition that federal law is supreme. A century of Jim Crow only furthered that same notion, culminating in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I'm sick and tired of playing footsie with these neo-Confederates. These neo-Confederates, by the way, who continue to say the most outrageous things imaginable about this nation's ICE agents and law enforcement more generally. For instance, here's the Soros-funded hack district attorney Larry Krasner, this absolute lunatic, speaking in Philadelphia yesterday on International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Watch this one.
This is a small bunch of wannabe Nazis. That's what they are. In a country of 350 million, we outnumber them. If we have to hunt you down the way they hunted down Nazis for decades, we will find your identities, we will find you, we will achieve justice.
All right, so just disgusting. Just absolutely, positively appalling stuff there from Larry Krasner. A man who, in theory, I believe he's Jewish, probably should not be going around on International Holocaust Remembrance Day comparing ICE to Nazis, as if he gives a hoot. Just unbelievable, disgusting stuff. Meanwhile, it's not the innocent victims of illegal alien crime that the Democrats are rushing to defend. No, it's not them at all. In fact, there was a story just earlier this week of an illegal alien who was here, came over during the Biden administration by the name of Kenneth Guzman, who held a 12 and 10-year-old, these siblings, held them at knife point after invading the home, raped the 12-year-old. You don't see a whole lot of Democrats talking about these stories, do you? On the contrary, it's the Democrats themselves who have abetted this illegal alien nightmare in this country, including the Minnesota Democrat leadership themselves, who are now playing the victim. For instance, here is Ilhan Omar yesterday at a press conference. I'm not sure I'm buying this one, but you can make your own mind. Go ahead and watch this clip.
And DHS Secretary Kristi Noem must resign or face impeachment. I don't know.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my my God, he sprayed
I need a
something
napkin.
on her.
I need a napkin to know nothing.
No, we'll go over.
No, we will continue.
No. Ilhan, you need to go get checked. No,
We will continue this. Not gonna get away with
need
it.
to go get checked. No, I don't know what.
All right, so Ilhan Omar doing some press conference there where you have someone in like the fourth or fifth row who rushes and sprays her with a syringe, to which Ilhan Omar responds and says, "I'm the victim here. This is all about me. I'm the victim here." Yeah, I mean, the woman who was worth basically a penny and now is magically worth in the tens and tens of millions of dollars. Oh, yeah, she's a big victim, all right. Unbelievable. I'm not really buying that, honestly. I mean, your mileage may vary. I'm going to go ahead and call BS, frankly, on that one. That seems to me like a very staged protest if I had to go ahead and guess. I think she's probably doing that for certain points. That is literally how low of an esteem I hold Ilhan Omar in. But the point is this. The point is that the victims of an illegal alien invasion and infestation in this country, the victims are myriad. You don't necessarily see them every day. The media does not necessarily cover their stories day in and day out. But they are there. And they are ubiquitous. There are countless episodes of people whose lives are made worse by illegal aliens. Joe Biden let in, by some estimates, over 8 million illegal aliens into this country. We don't even know, but that's some estimates. The Trump administration is fundamentally trying to clean up the act. If you don't like what ICE is doing, maybe you should have objected to the Biden open borders idiots, Secretary Mayorkas and all those band of goons. Maybe you should have objected to them letting these people into the interior in the first place. Maybe then you wouldn't have these door-to-door raids that they're so scared about. Maybe now you wouldn't have people protesting Ilhan Omar. Maybe, just maybe, this could have been handled differently. But it wasn't, and now it won't be. That's the answer. Stay with us at the break, folks. We will be right back on the other side. Welcome back. So again, the media, this entire news cycle has been up in arms over this Ilhan Omar syringe, quote-unquote, attack, which, again, I'm pretty skeptical of. I mean, maybe I'm too cynical, but frankly, when it comes to Ilhan Omar, the woman who said that some people did something on 9/11 and some people, aka Muslims, now pay the price of it. The woman who said that, who said so many insane things I wouldn't even know where to count. I'm inclined to really not necessarily believe what I see in this particular case. But also, the same folks who have been crying about Ilhan Omar getting someone in her face there. And to be clear, let's stipulate, if this actually was a real attacker, let's do a thorough investigation, press charges, et cetera, et cetera. It's obviously unacceptable if that was a real thing that happened there. I'm just skeptical. And certainly there is hypocrisy on the face of those as well who are now pretending this is the biggest deal under the sun and were either MIA or potentially even cheering on the disgusting, outrageous political violence against conservatives for years now. I mean, the multiple assassination attempts against Donald Trump, the tragic assassination of my friend Charlie Kirk. Where were you then? Oh, yeah. In some cases, you actually were cheering it on. So, frankly, go to hell. In other news, Donald Trump cracking down as well when it comes to Los Angeles and California. And this actually does relate back to the situation in Minnesota with ICE. And I want to just connect the dots there just momentarily. So Donald Trump also announcing just yesterday on Tuesday, January 27th, that he's signed an executive order that will move the permitting authority from California and Los Angeles from the states and localities to the federal government as they try to rebuild from the devastating Pacific Palisades fire that really continues just to leave a massive gazing eyesore. I was actually just there in Los Angeles a little over a week ago. I was chatting with a bunch of locals as to what is happening in Pacific Palisades right now. They said you basically won't see a whole lot. You'll drive up and down the main road. You'll see some houses that manage to stay up there, but the town is still reeling. And the objection from the Trump administration is that the permitting process when it comes to the County of Los Angeles, the cities of Los Angeles, Malibu, and Pasadena, as well as the state of California, that they simply have not been anywhere close to efficient enough when it comes to actually getting those permits out there to actually rebuild these homes, churches. I mean, just the basic buildings that are necessary for day-to-day life there in California. So according to actual California statistics, publicly available, they claim that roughly 2,900 permits have been issued by Los Angeles County and the cities combined. There's about 2,600 that remain under review. The executive order that Donald Trump signed really just puts Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass, who is the mayor of Los Angeles, just directly in his crosshairs. Donald Trump saying this is one of the greatest failures of elected political leadership in American history, from enabling the wildfires to failing to manage them. And it continues with the abject failure to rebuild. Donald Trump saying that the feds need to release, not take over local permit approval speed. The main obstacle is communities not having the money to rebuild. So there's this real tension here when it comes to Donald Trump and Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom, part of this plays into his clear insistence on being the front runner in 2028, for which he probably is at this time. We'll get into that a little bit on tomorrow's show, probably with our guest tomorrow, Kurt Schlichter, who's a local Californian, has lots of thoughts on that particular part of the puzzle. But the broader point that I want to make is this. Donald Trump signed this executive order saying that he is now going to try to take over as much as possible when it comes to local and state permitting out there for the rebuilding process, whether it is that, whether it's a situation in Minnesota. You see here that the federal government sometimes has to step in where there is rank incompetence and or obstructionism rising to the point of de facto anarchy or lawlessness. That is fundamentally the common theme. You know, we're big Constitution, rule of law guys here on the show. I've been talking a lot recently about Article 6 of the Constitution, an article that you probably are not familiar with, that talks about the Supremacy Clause. The Supremacy Clause establishes the notion, much to the chagrin of both John C. Calhoun a century and a half ago and Tim Walz today, the Supremacy Clause establishes the notion that federal law is supreme. Well, there is a somewhat similar provision buried in Article 4 of the Constitution that is known sometimes as the Guarantee Clause, sometimes as the Republican Form of Government Clause. And the provision reads, it says, the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a Republican form of government and shall protect each of them against invasion and an application of the legislature or of the executive when the legislature cannot be convened against domestic violence. Essentially saying that it is the prerogative of the federal government to guarantee a Republican form of government to the states. What that means is that when there is a state of anarchy or uprising or lawlessness, the federal government has an obligation to step in. Now, we can debate exactly what that threshold is. But this long-running debate that Donald Trump's been publicly musing about invoking the Insurrection Act, this 1807 Thomas Jefferson-era statute, whether you invoke that to try to send in armed military to try to enforce law, you could argue it's actually constitutionally guaranteed. It's required. The statute is actually a logical follow-on of the Republican Form of Government Clause there in Article 4 of the Constitution. Now, I'm not saying that the bureaucratic red tape in the nation's quintessential Democrat state, California, I'm not saying necessarily that is a failure to have a Republican form of government, thereby necessitating federal intervention. What I am saying is that there is a common denominator here when it comes to the utter and complete fecklessness when it comes to rebuilding people's basic homes and livelihoods in Southern California, to the obstructionism and anarchy in Minneapolis, to frankly all sorts of other blue cities and blue states all across the country as well. Look at Chicago. Chicago, under now multiple mayors in a row, has been an utterly failed city. Whether it was Mayor Lori Lightfoot, Mayor Brandon Johnson, someone who makes Lori Lightfoot look somewhat sane by comparison. These are failed jurisdictions. And there are still to this day some on the right who think so aggressively in terms of states' rights and federalism that they get really uneasy with this notion that the federal government could be going in to maybe trying to subsume or overtake local and state level enforcement prerogatives. And there is truth to the notion that what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I understand that you don't always necessarily want to set the precedent that could be abused by a subsequent, let's call it a Gavin Newsom or Kamala Harris, God forbid, presidential administration. There is precedent for that. But law and order and the rule of law have to be enforced. And look, they're getting it really hard. The administration is in, at this point, probably the PR fight of its young tenure here in the second term. The Jeffrey Epstein files, that back and forth was definitely a PR mess. It was not the Trump administration's finest hour, for sure. No doubt about that. But this is a real PR challenge for the administration. Just yesterday, there was another shooting actually out in Arizona involving a border patrol. There was a man by the name of Patrick Gary Schlegel, who has previously served time for transportation of illegal aliens. Some other gun charge there. Shots were fired back and forth between him and the agents. Now you have Ilhan Omar with this video of Minnesota playing the victim. And now you have Minnesotans in general who are playing the victims. Two so-called protesters, a.k.a. anarchist obstructionists, have died. This is a real PR challenge. But fundamentally, the law must be enforced. It actually really ultimately is that simple. You know, I think about it in some ways as an analogy to the pro-life cause. You know, it's very easy to let some of these feminists or abortion apologists try to bully you and say that you're a misogynist, you hate women if you want to protect unborn innocent life. You know why? Because you can't see the unborn child there in the womb. You can't see it. But you know it's there. And that's what we're advocating for. It's similar here. You can't necessarily see the victims of illegal alien crime. The people that, for instance, earlier this week, Kenneth Guzman, an illegal alien who came under the Biden administration, raped. He raped a 12-year-old. You won't see that 12-year-old with your own eyes. You will see these obstructionists in Minnesota, the pink-haired weirdos with their stupid signs. You will see them. That doesn't mean that it's right to stand with them. Sometimes it's correct to stand with those whom you can't see. In fact, we know from history that those are oftentimes situations that you need to speak out actually the very most. Stay with us through the break, folks. We will be right back with much more content here on the other side of the break. Welcome back. I want to switch gears now and talk about an issue that we really have not talked a whole lot on this show for a very long time because, frankly, it hasn't been in the news for a long time. And the reason that this issue, same-sex marriage, has not been in the news is because it's been removed from the people. You see, we the people no longer have the ability to debate, to formulate, and to legislate on what we prefer marriage policy to look like. At least at the highest level when it comes to the most foundational question in marriage policy, namely, what is a marriage? What is the definition of marriage? Is it one man, one woman? Is it two individuals of any sex? Is it 3, 4, 5, 10, 100 people? What is a marriage? Well, we haven't really been able to debate that, have we? At least since 2015. In 2015, the Supreme Court decided the Obergefell case. Obergefell versus Hodges. It was at least the fourth in a series of cases at the U.S. Supreme Court, which you might refer to as the gay cases, the homosexual cases, starting with a case in the 1990s out of Colorado called Romer versus Evans, going then to Texas in 2003 with a case called Lawrence versus Texas, and then the two marriage cases themselves. In 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a case called Windsor, struck down, nullified, a Bill Clinton-era statute called DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act. By that time, the Barack Obama administration, which campaigned in 2008, Obama-Biden campaigned in 2008 as defenders of traditional one-man, one-woman marriage. Now, anyone who has ever played poker knew that Barack Obama was lying through his teeth. Barack Obama, back when he was a legislator in Illinois, spoke favorably of the then extremely fringe idea of same-sex marriage. He changed his tune a little bit in 2008 to try to get elected. Everyone knew he was lying. And sure enough, by 2013, when the Clinton-era Defense of Marriage Act, a law that Bill Clinton signed into law, defining for purposes of federal law one man, one woman, when that statute came before the court, Barack Obama instructed his DOJ to not defend it. And ultimately, that statute was unfortunately struck down by a bare 5-4 court. In the Windsor case, the court said that we're going to leave this to the states just for federal purposes. We're not going to get our hands dirty when it comes to defining marriage, which is a dumb rationale, but it's what they said. 2 years later, they changed course yet again. In the Obergefell case, Obergefell versus Hodges, the court decided in arguably the single worst judicial opinion I've ever read in my entire life. I've read a lot of judicial stink bombs in my life. The Anthony Kennedy majority opinion, Obergefell, is a mess. It is faux philosophical gobbledygook. There is no clear or compelling legal rationale provided in this entire opinion as to why, under the 14th Amendment of the United States, there must be a certain redefinition of marriage. There is absolutely no rationale given. It's basically you sprinkle a little equal protection clause here, a little bit of the due process clause here, and therefore, marriage has been redefined. It's nutso stuff. Anthony Scalia, in his dissenting opinion there in Obergefell in 2015, the late, great Anthony Scalia, fundamentally got it right. He said, hubris is sometimes defined as overweening pride, and pride, we know, goeth before a fall. The judiciary is the least dangerous of the federal branches because it has neither force nor will, but merely judgment, and must ultimately depend upon the aid of the executive arm in the states, even for the efficacy of its own judgments. With each decision of ours that takes from the people a question properly left to them, with each decision that is unabashedly based not on law, but on the reasoned judgment of a bare majority of this court, we move one step closer to being reminded of our own impotence. He's basically calling on Congress to rein in the courts, to remind the courts of their own impotence. A call that we've been echoing here on this show for this past year of judicial insurrection against the Trump administration. So all that is to say that there is a brand new campaign launching today called the Greater Than Campaign. You can check out the campaign at greaterthancampaign.com. It's being spearheaded by Katie Faust. Katie is a conservative activist who I've had the pleasure of knowing for some years now. She is very outspoken when it comes to social and cultural issues, especially when it comes to surrogacy is really one of her biggest issues when it comes to questioning the ethics of surrogacy, getting into the weeds sometimes of how exactly IVF, make sure that we're doing that in a properly ethical fashion as well. They're certainly on the abortion issue. And now Katie is leading this campaign when it comes to trying to galvanize lawmakers, judges, and our culture to overturn Obergefell and to bring marriage policy back to the states and to the Congress, ideally, so that we all can debate among ourselves what is the definition, properly speaking, of marriage. Well, as the case may be, I was in this launch video today. I'm proud to be part of this campaign. Here's a snippet of the Greater Than campaign's launch video.
There's two legitimate ways to unite a child to adults. The first one is biology. If you made the baby, that baby has a claim to you. The second pathway is adoption, where a child has suffered loss, and a just society responds by placing them with parents who have undergone screening and vetting and background checks to, as much as possible, replicate the kind of protectiveness that a biological mother and father would offer the child. That's not what's happening today.
Marriage policy should be about the children. It's not about bestowing public policy legitimacy and conferring economic benefits when it comes to adults who have their own idiosyncratic romantic desires. That's not the purpose of marriage policy.
Redefining marriage robs children of the natural right to their mother and father.
And it puts adult desires over children's needs. It has to stop. Children
are greater.
Children
Are greater
Children are greater
than equal.
And it's time we fought for their rights.
All right, so you see some other social conservative leaders there in that video that, again, I was very proud to be a part of. You saw Lila Rose of Live Action, Ali Beth Stuckey of Blaze TV is in the video. Steve Dace, also Blaze TV, is a big part of this campaign. Many others as well. Focus on the Family is heavily involved there. Folks, the basic argument is this. The basic argument is that marriage is fundamentally not about adult romantic desires. It's just not. You might have whatever desires you have. That is not the reason to justify state intervention and trying to incentivize and induce people to live lives together. Okay? The reason that the state gets involved is to provide for the children. It is a simple biological fact that every time a child is born, a mother is present. That's biological fact. It is the role of marriage policy and lawmakers and jurists to best incentivize a societal structure and a cultural milieu more generally, such that it's not just a woman who is present when a child is born, but a man is present as well. That's the purpose of marriage policy. Now, interestingly, the polling on this has actually gotten pretty interesting. So there was an Economist YouGov poll just a few months ago in October 2025 that did indeed have a considerable net pro same-sex marriage stance. So 54% said yes, 33% said no, 30% unsure to the question as to whether same-sex marriage should be legal. But that actually was a big drop from a 2021 Gallup poll, which at that time found 70% of Americans support same-sex marriage. So it's dropped by at least 15 to 20% just over the past few years. Now, the percentage of Republicans themselves who support same-sex marriage has actually been dropping precipitously. So that same year that Gallup recorded 70% national support in 2021, you had roughly 55 to 56% of Republicans who supported same-sex marriage. That is now down to 41% per a Gallup poll from this past year in May of 2025. So Republicans seem to be getting more conservative on this issue. Maybe it's because you have a lot of Gen Z folks, a lot of Zoomers who are now picking up their Bible, going to church, part of this kind of Charlie Kirk, Turning Point USA inspired church revival there. Again, you can be a religious person or you cannot be a religious person. And you can do with your private life what you want to do. There's only so much that your fellow citizens and the government can do to try to steer you one way or the other. The key thing, again, is this. A society is only as good as its children. It is only as good as its next generation and the generation after that. You want children to grow up in as loving, warm, and yes, as natural a family setting as is reasonably possible. Will there be alternative family structures? Presumably, I'm sure that will happen essentially till the end of time. But when it comes to the role of the state, when you're trying to incentivize, you really want to try to get as many children as possible to be there with their biological parents. That shouldn't be controversial. It wasn't for thousands of years. The fact that that's a controversial statement today says a lot more about where we are today, frankly, than anything else. Again, check out the whole campaign, folks, at greaterthancampaign.com. Stay with us for the break. We'll be right back on the other side of a quick commercial break. Welcome back. So switching gears a little bit, we were just talking about the Greater Than campaign and the newfound resurgent fight to overturn Obergefell and therefore to return marriage really to the people, which is fundamentally where it belongs. I wish this campaign nothing but the best, and I hope that Obergefell one day is overturned, and that we the people once again bring back the ability to even engage in a good faith conversation. Because much like Roe versus Wade, for decades and decades, for 49 grisly, bloody years, Roe versus Wade deprived we the people of the ability to have a conversation about abortion in this country. So too has Obergefell now for almost 11 years deprived we the people of the ability to have a conversation about marriage policy in this country. It is past time for it to be overruled, and hopefully, God willing, may it come speedily in our days. Well, something that did not come super speedily, but now finally has happened. The final hostage, the final Israeli hostage from Gaza has been returned. He was not alive, of course, sadly, so Ron Gavili, may his blood be avenged. That's what we say in Judaism for someone who has been slain for the fact that he was Jewish. You say, may his blood be avenged. He was one of many Israelis who was murdered on October 7, 2023. So he was a police officer who was stationed at a kibbutz, at a small communal village, an outpost essentially there in southern Israel, not terribly far from Gaza. He actually just had a shoulder injury. He was recovering from a brutal shoulder injury. Nonetheless, he heard the sirens. He heard what happened when it came out the invasion. He grabbed his firearm and tried to hold off the Hamas invasion the best he could, and ultimately he paid for it with his life. His body was then taken, his dead body was taken into Gaza, along with at least 250 other Israelis and many other non-Israelis, many Americans, and various other nationalities as well. And he ends up being the final hostage, dead or alive, to make it out of Gaza. So for a long time now, for months and months, we've had this back and forth as to whether or not Israel is going to be able to get back Ron Gavili, whether they're going to be able to find his body there. Hamas was obstructing this. Hamas was saying that they didn't know where it was. Hamas was saying that this actually fell on Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is the rival jihadist group to Hamas in Gaza. They were saying this was actually that these other guys, they basically like, they know where the body is. We don't know where it is there. Hamas playing all these dumb games that no one should ever believe them for a second in terms of what they were trying to do there. But there's a happy-ish ending to this terrible story, which is that finally, a few days ago, earlier this week, they brought their final hostage home. So Ron Gavili, after 843 days, Ron Gavili, the final hostage, has been returned to Israel. There's an amazing video. There's a square in Tel Aviv called Hostage Square. I was there, I believe, once. And immediately after October 7th, the hostage family set up this square, and they were there 24/7. It was really remarkable. I was there in January 2024, I believe it was, so shortly after the pogrom. They had a very, very, very long table in the middle where there were chairs and plates set as if they were going to do a Shabbat, a Sabbath meal for all the hostages. Empty plates, empty silverware. People singing and dancing, selling merchandise on behalf of the hostages there. And they had a clock. They had a clock where they were counting down the days, hours, minutes, and seconds until the final hostage was returned. And this week, the clock went black. It's done after 843 days because the final hostage has been brought home. Go ahead and watch this clip. Pretty remarkable stuff. And it's a very solemn occasion. Obviously, Ron Gavili is deceased, and he has now been formally laid to rest in Israel. So his body is now not in Gaza, but back in Israel. But nonetheless, as tragic as this whole horrible ordeal has been, it is nonetheless the end of an era. And for the first time in over a decade, actually, there's not currently any Israeli hostages actually in Gaza. So there was at least a few people that were taken hostage back in 2014. That was part of the predecessor to the last big Hamas war back in 2014. So for the first time in at least 12 years, there are no Israeli hostages actually currently in Gaza, which itself is a pretty remarkable thing. Now, we're going to bring on this Friday on the show Rabbi Pinchas Taylor, former guest on the Josh Hammer Show. Rabbi Taylor lives not far from me here in South Florida. He is, among other things, he's a bridge builder, a huge proponent, and a huge activist when it comes to Jewish, Christian, ecumenical, biblical bridge building. He's hosted Christian activists at his home for Shabbat. We'll get into all that with Rabbi Taylor this Friday. But I thought of him a little there because we'll talk a little bit about this week's Torah portion with Rabbi Taylor on Friday. I want to give you just a very brief preview. So we're currently here, and I promise that this will relate back to the hostage situation. We're currently in the first half of the book of Exodus. And we're actually now basically at the climax. So again, more on this on Friday with Rabbi Taylor, but we're basically now at the climax of the Exodus. So just last week, we finished the portion with the 10 plagues, and Pharaoh basically says to Moses, okay, like, you just killed our firstborn sons, you've done a lot, get out, leave. And this week's Torah portion, Parsha Beshalach, is the splitting of the sea itself, one of the most iconic images, really, in all of the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament. I say all that because it's the third verse of this week's Torah portion, the very third verse. So we're in Exodus chapter 13, verse 19. Listen to this. Moses took Joseph's bones with him, for Joseph had adjured the sons of Israel, saying, God will surely remember you, and you shall bring up my bones from here with you. I mean, I literally just got chills down my spine reading that. I mean, is that not exactly what happened this week to Ron Gavili? The bones. God will surely remember you, and you shall bring up my bones from here with you. That's literally to a T what just happened in real life. Just remarkable timing. Again, we'll get into this a little bit more, probably with Rabbi Taylor this Friday. For present purposes, I want to just talk a little about where the situation in Gaza goes from here. You know, currently all eyes in the Middle East are on the Iran situation. There's been more rumors flying over the past 24 hours as to whether or not U.S. action against Iran, against the Ayatollah Khamenei, against the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, about whether this action really is imminent. Seems to me like it more likely is coming sooner rather than later, if I had to guess. But there's this whole situation in Gaza too, and it is a big, big situation. So the Trump administration has transitioned to what it calls phase 2 in the Gaza Strip. Phase 2 is where Donald Trump's whole Board of Peace project comes in here. The Board of Peace includes a general executive board chaired by Trump himself with 7 members. Then there's an executive board for the Gaza Strip with 11 members, including representatives from Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, the UAE, and others. This is where Netanyahu and Trump have a big difference of opinion. Netanyahu was adamant that Qatar and Turkey, who are pro-Hamas, pro-Muslim Brotherhood states, Netanyahu was adamant that Turkey and Qatar cannot have anything to do with the situation in Gaza. So we'll see exactly how that plays out there. But currently there's this tension in the background between Trump and Netanyahu on at least that particular front. But one of the parts of phase 2, and Trump, to his great credit, is now saying this over and over again, he's saying Hamas has to disarm. You need the demilitarization of Gaza. Been all this talk from Trump and Wickoff and Kushner about developing Gaza. You're going to have the 4 seasons at Khan Yunis, the Ritz-Carlton, Gaza City. I'm kind of joking, but there's definitely been a little bit of that kind of talk. And the question to me is, okay, sounds great. What exactly is the plan between now and then? Are you going to build the 4 seasons in Khan Yunis like over a bunch of Hamas terror tunnels? Are you going to have Hamas armories and rocket facilities underneath the Ritz-Carlton on the beach? No. I mean, you have to extirpate this. You have to actually eliminate the militarization of this narrow strip of land that Hamas has turned into their little jihadist launching pad for the past now nearly 19 years. Easier said than done. And again, this is where rock meets a hard place. I don't know how that happens. I genuinely don't. I would love my skepticism to be proven wrong. I would really love that. Really, I would. Earnestly, honest to God. The people of Gaza deserve a future. Gaza is a beautiful piece of property. They called it the Singapore of the Mediterranean years ago. It should have a future. But you have a radicalized population of people holding Nazi-esque views against Jews, Christians, and other so-called infidels. What are you going to do about that? I just am not sure I frankly see it there. I wish the administration nothing but the best, but they have a big, big fight ahead of them. My goodness gracious. All the best of luck certainly to you guys. Have a great rest of your evening, folks. Hope you enjoyed today's episode of The Josh Hammer Show. We will be right back tomorrow.